Good morning. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It is Friday, January 10th, 2025, and this is our first live stream of the 2025-26 biennium. So welcome, everybody. We're glad you're here. For the viewing audiences, I think we will go around the room, if we would, please, and introduce yourself and what district you're from. So Dave, we're going to start with you.
Thank you. I'm Dave Iacoboni. I represent Lamoille, Washington District. Includes the towns of Elmore, Morristown, Worcester, Woodbury, and a small portion of Stowe. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Dave.
I'm John Gosenska I live in East Burke, representing the Essex Caledonia District, which runs from Burke all the way up to Bloomfield.
Lots in between.
Lots in between.
And Mike sits next to you, and Mike, you're on Zoom, so why don't you introduce yourself there?
Sure. I'm Michael Nigro, and I represent Bennington and the northern tip of Pownell.
Thank you.
Tom Stevens from Waterbury, represent Washington Chittenden District, which is Waterbury, Bolton, Huntington, and Beals, Florida.
Good morning, Jim Harrison. I represent Rutland 11, which includes the town of Chittenden, where I live, Mendon, Killington, and Pittsfield, all Rutland County towns on the eastern side.
Thanks. And I'm Robin Shy, and I'm from Middlebury, and that's my town.
I'm Tiff Plumley. I represent the south end of Burlington, Chittenden 13.
Trevor Squirrel, Chittenden 3, and I represent Underhill and Jericho.
And we're missing Wayne LaRush, who is from Franklin County. I don't remember the town.
Franklin, Highgate, Berkshire, and Richford.
Okay, Franklin, Highgate, Richford, and Berkshire, and he's will be on Zoom this afternoon.
Hi, I'm Mike Marookie, and I represent the Wyndham 4 district, two towns, Putney and Dummerston.
Hi, I'm Lynn Dickinson. I live in St. Albans Town. I represent 2/3 of St. Albans Town.
So here's the team. And our first order of business is to elect a clerk. Do we have a nomination?
Well, I've had the honor the last couple of years, the last biennium, of serving as council clerk. But Robin says I can't do both. So I would like to nominate a very experienced member of our committee and valued member of our committee, Trevor Squirrel, to be our next appropriations clerk. As most of you know, clerk's role is to record our votes and help us with our motions that go to the clerk's office. And I think Trevor is going to do absolutely.
Thank you. So
do we need a second?
I don't know. Do we need a second?
I would second that.
Okay. And so unless there are other people who are dying to be clerk and haven't told me, all those in favor of electing Trevor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I think you're unanimously selected as our clerk, Trevor. Thank you so much. It gets busy at certain times of the year, and the rest of the time it's not too bad. So I just.
And Aaron will be a big.
Aaron, yes. Yeah, and it's good because you can reach over the computer to each other. So I just wanted to tell you and just a general arc of how the session is going to work, and we'll talk about it again at points along the map as we get there. But just sort of a general thing. We're getting the budget adjustment today. That's going to be our first bill. This is week one. The first couple of weeks, we're also going to have various training classes that we are required by the House. There's a chairs and vice chairs training on Tuesday afternoon. We'll have sexual harassment training and ethics. What are they at? What else, Catherine? Anyway, a couple of other things. So that'll be happening over the first couple of weeks. We'll be told when those are. So we're going to spend the next about 3 weeks. We're starting a week late this year, so I'm feeling a little off on the dates. But the first 3 weeks are usually taken up with budget adjustment. What I do remember is I told you yesterday, my granddaughter was born at budget adjustment being presented on the floor. And that was the first week of February. So that's my anchor into how I think about budget adjustment. So that'll be presented on the floor. So we're going to be going through that the next couple of weeks. We're going to be talking to our committees. you will all get your budget portfolios. I'll come find you. I want to have that sort of done by Tuesday. Still working on putting that piece together. So I'll come reach out to you possibly over the weekend, maybe Monday, but certainly by Tuesday, so that everybody will have their list of what their budget portfolios are. So then, based on what we learn about the budget adjustment, you can start talking to the committees and people on the committee about if there are key things that we need to talk to them about. We'll talk more about that next week. So after the budget adjustment goes out, while this is happening, the emergency board is going to meet on January 22nd at 10 or 11 or something late morning. The emergency board are the 4 money chairs and the governor. And what we will get then is the consensus revenue forecast for the next 6 months. So the E-board meets in January and July. Our economists and the governor administration's economists get together and then they set the consensus and then we hear it. So we will know then sort of what the size of the sandboxes we get to play in for the FY26 budget at that point in time. And Tom Pivette will come in and talk to us. That may actually be our first day. We're looking at doing a joint meeting with Senate Appropriations when Tom Pivette comes in. We're going to try to do some more joint work where it's feasible. You know, the Senate set up differently. They have morning and afternoon committees. The Senate Appropriations Committee meets in the afternoon. So anything that we do with them would be an afternoon event. And then the governor will give his budget address. It's my understanding it's Tuesday, January 28th. And then usually that's at 2:00 in the afternoon. And usually what happens after that is we have Adam Gresham come in from Finance and Management. You'll meet him this afternoon if you haven't already met him. And he'll start working on presenting the budget then. So then we'll be working on the budget and getting testimony for quite a while till we'll vote on the budget probably the last week in March, maybe around the 31st. It might be the previous week. Again, I don't know when crossover is going to be, but it's after town meeting. It's usually at least 2 weeks after town meeting that the budget has to be done. We take a straw poll on a Friday. We will work as late as it takes to get to that straw poll on that Friday. That weekend, our joint fiscal office staff don't get any sleep and they work really hard. And we come in on Monday and we get a draft of the final draft of the budget, and we all sit around and read it, and then we vote on it. So we may come in early on that Monday morning when that happens. And that's when we do our final vote. And then it'll be on the floor later that week. The exact dates I can't tell you, but so after town meeting, we're going to have at least a couple of weeks where we're going to have bills from other committees coming in, and everybody wants us to pass their bill, take up their bill, pass their bill, and we're working on finalizing the budget. I'm going to do my very best to make it not insane. Last year, we had dozens and dozens of bills that came into us very late that we were asked to take a look at. And I'm going to do my best to try to minimize that kind of action because it really impacts our ability to do the budget. And the budget is our priority. We have to get that out. So be prepared, March, to ratchet up the Lynn.
Are we going to hear from about the ARPA money and the
Yes.
end?
We are going to hear about the ARPA money on Tuesday. I'll get to that. Yes. Good question. So after the budget gets out of here, then we present it on the floor. Everybody's going to have a role presenting it on the floor, your budget areas. And then it goes off to the Senate, and then we have a breather. And that's in April. We have a couple of weeks where we will do maybe some deep dives into topic areas that have come up along the way. We have taken field trips. We've gone to some housing projects before around here, a walking tour with Gus Seelig.
Ground tour of the
Oh, yeah.
office
So
complex.
last year we did the whole flood thing because we had so many buildings that were closed because of the flood. And we got tours of 4 of them. And then we got to go over into the tax building and into the bowels of the building. And we didn't get to go in the tunnel because it was closed, but that may be on the list for this year. So we'll have a little breathing room. And then the Senate will do their thing, and then we'll form a committee of conference. And by the end of May, we will close on the budget and move on. So that's sort of really broad outline. We also are likely to have a committee of conference for the budget adjustment we'll find out as we go along, but that's often the case as well. So any questions about sort of the big picture of what we're talking about? Have I missed anything, JFO staff? Is that kind of enough?
So,
Okay.
the only thing, if I may.
Yes.
That I would add is, I heard this question last year from not a member of this committee, but because the budget is different than other bills, like we don't get these interim versions, you'll get the version after you do the straw poll, but you won't get any like draft 1, 2, 3, like you do on some other bills. So I just, for the new members,
Yes.
that's an important difference.
Right. We may be doing straw polls on pieces of paper that have language. And we sometimes do we get any kind of an interim web report? Maybe we don't.
No,
We don't.
no,
Okay.
all of that
Okay.
is done that
Okay.
weekend when we're working
Right,
like
right.
jobs next door.
Yes, exactly.
The language part, though, we'll have.
You will vote on, yeah, we'll have iterations of the
uh,
language.
Yes.
And so all of that we'll talk about again. This is a whole lot to talk about now. It's a long way off, but I just wanted to let you kind of know the context, and then we'll talk about it again as we go along. So,
And if I
Yeah.
may, in that area, depending on your respective areas, you'll spend a lot of time also with the policy committee, because a lot of times they're helping us with the language for their particular sections and may oftentimes propose language, and that you need to work with them to get it into the budget draft.
and so you'll hear more about that too. So I think that's the end of my piece, and now I am turning it over to Catherine. Joint fiscal. Woo-hoo. Come on up. Come on down.
Good morning. I'm Catherine Benner. I'm the Chief Fiscal Officer with the Joint Fiscal Office, and it's good to see all of you. Unfortunately, I have to go because I have an 11 o'clock commitment. So I'm introducing myself, and then Emily is going to take it from here. But I just want to thank you all, welcome you, and thank you all for taking on this assignment. It's an important responsibility for the state, and I appreciate your energy. And I'll let Emily introduce herself, and I will see all of you around. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine.
Yeah.
Great. So I'll jump in. We just thought it would be good to do introductions of some of the JFO staff on the budget team that you'll see coming in and out of the room. Just sort of a quick framing of like what JFO does and how we're here to help. So first off, congratulations on your appointment to House Appropriations. You're going to do an incredible and important work. And we're here to help you do that, right? Balancing the state budget and prioritizing the use of taxpayer dollars is challenging, but it also can be really fun. And we try to be fun also. I know you were talking about some of you are fun. We try to be fun. And while all the bills that the legislature is doing, right, this is the only must pass bill. Government effectively shuts down if there's no budget on June 30th. So we have to do that. So as you know, JFO provides nonpartisan fiscal analysis to the General Assembly. We mostly staff the money committees, so Appropriations, Ways and Means, Senate Finance. Statutorily, we also staff Transportation and the Institutions Committees, but as the sort of fiscal demands have grown, our staff has grown, and we support, you may know Nolan doing healthcare, other folks supporting all kinds of work of the General Assembly. So real quick, just run through the JFO team. You've all met Erin, right? She's on her 3rd session. She's going to keep your trains running on time. Maria, she's your point person on the budget issues, right? She's going to keep track of everything for the committee. It's her job to sort of stick with you guys. She's going to keep track of all the details. I'm going to introduce Chris next because he has to go up to Ways and Means, but Chris Roop is the Associate Fiscal Officer. He's in charge of the revenue team. So we work closely together. To the extent his committees are raising money and you guys are spending the money, we make sure that those are the same numbers. And that's the goal.
You don't spend more than what you raise.
Exactly. And he's got a staff, Ted and Pat and James. James is new to JFO. They are working on lots of different policies with the housing committees and the natural resources committees and all over the place that money might be being raised. And they may be in here, they may not, but they're around the building. Chris, you can go if you want to. So who else is doing? Grady, you may remember Grady. Grady's in charge of the words section of the bill. He makes sure that the language is correct, that it achieves your sort of goals, works closely with Ledge Council to make sure it's also in compliance with the law, and helps me and Maria and other folks make sure that, we have good grammar across things that we're presenting to you guys. And he and I stick with the bill. We're going to be in here sort of when you are responsible for the bill. And then when it goes over to the Senate, you will see less of us and we will be spending a lot of time in the Senate. So think about Maria sort of in charge of the committee and we're in charge of the bill. And so similarly, we've got Maria on the House side. Amy Pope has the same role as Maria, but in Senate appropriations. We're a small team. We work closely together. She is helping them doing the same thing that Maria is doing, but as a group, we're all putting the budget together. So Amy may be in and out. She helps with different policy issues as well. And then similarly, Elle Stamforth is the new committee assistant in Senate appropriations. So you may see her on committee of conferences and other things. So she's around. Who else is on the budget team? We brought Jeremy with us. We don't know that we've ever brought Jeremy in, but Jeremy is our systems analyst and Jeremy is responsible, he did all of the coding and background on the web report, so all of the sort of tech behind that makes that web report, which does two things. One, it outlines sort of the whole budget and the budget adjustment by section, shows you the changes from the Gov to the House, the Senate to the conference committee, and has all of that sort of details, like the little explanations. Jeremy built all the code and everything behind that drives that. And that ultimately sort of generates the bill itself. So we thought it would be good to introduce Jeremy. He probably won't be back in here, but he is back at JFO doing yeoman's work to get the budget done. And then the other one we thought we'd mention is who's part of the budget team is Logan Mooberry. He is the transportation analyst. So he is going to spend a lot of time with the transportation committees and he'll be in once it's time, the transportation plan that committee adopts gets rolled into the budget. Logan will be in to present those changes. And then if there are any actual changes to appropriations, they are adopted in the budget to align with the T-bill. So he'll review for that. There are lots of other analysts. You may remember Scott, who does the capital bill. I'm definitely forgetting people, but JFO folks will be in and out. That's the group you'll primarily see. So again, just going through Catherine's notes, right? We're nonpartisan. Pride ourselves on serving all legislators, providing objective analysis to everybody. And just a reminder, our conversations are confidential. So we don't share anything unless you tell us to share it. And please don't hesitate to ask us questions. Sometimes the appropriations language is a different language. It's, we'll be rattling off stuff about direct applications and reversions and carry forward. And that's a very specific definition. And if don't hesitate to ask us to, what those terms mean, what the rating agencies do, sort of what those sort of complicated terms are. We're a small staff. We can't do a fiscal note for every bill. We try to get fiscal notes for all the bills that hit appropriations. Sometimes we have to prioritize. So don't hesitate to reach out to Catherine or I. If you want a fiscal note on something, we can figure out whether or not it's within our ability to do it. So in summary, we're here to provide you the best information so you can make good policy choices. Aaron and Maria are going to be your key people. I'll be the sort of contact on big picture stuff. And if you have any issues or concerns, you can always reach out to Catherine or I. Thank you for taking on this responsibility. You're not going to be bored. You're going to learn a lot and you're going to help keep Vermont a great state. So that's what Catherine wanted to present. Sorry she had to run off, but if you have any more questions for me, I'm happy to answer them. And then we have Maria's teed up to do a sort of overview of the budget. And
I just want to add one more thing. These guys work incredibly hard for us and we don't want to abuse that. So we don't need to ask for things that we don't need or whatever. Just think about that. And also, sometimes staff is sitting at that desk, whether it's Ledge Council or JFO staff, presenting something and there may be some policy. They didn't create the policy. They aren't making the decisions on the policy. So don't say, well, why did you do this? I don't agree with that. Well, that's the staff are not the people that have done that. We talk to our colleagues and ask them those questions, but not the JFO staff. So.
Can I just add one thing? Because that's what I do. I will add that Emily and her team rose to the challenge last year in terms of putting together a March Madness team for the joint fiscal office. And they started off real well. They faltered, but they did end up in 5th place. The only thing I would add is they nudged out, they came in 5th. They nudged out House Appropriations, which wasn't really the best thing to do. Because we came in 6th place in the team competition, but I appreciated the team spirit that the office held. I think they virtually got every member of the staff to participate in it. I don't know how you threatened them, but coerced them.
I have my ways.
They had a lot of fun, so.
Yes.
And that's important.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Emily. Any questions for Emily at this point? Good. Okay. Thanks, Maria. Thanks, Emily.
Good morning. I'm going to go through some slides that we put together, and I think it just provides context for the budget. I think you've seen some of these already if you came to the all-member briefing, but we thought it'd be useful to do a little review. So Erin is kindly driving this for me. So the two of us are going to be nodding at each other. So this is a document that we just call Welcome to the Budget. So it's going to be posted. You can use it for a variety of purposes. If you need to show it to a constituent who has questions about the budget, it's just a good overview. So first, as Emily noted, the budget is different from all the other bills. Erin, let's just move to the next. Okay, so this is the Appropriations Act, and sometimes we refer to it as the big bill. And this picture sort of demonstrates how big the big bill is. You know, it's a really big chunk of paper.
Is that a grapefruit or an orange?
Well, I was gonna, yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, this is it gives you an idea of how much information is in the budget, and it's a really important document, and that's why it takes so much attention from this committee to put together. And it provides, so it's the legislature, as you know, has the power of the purse, and this bill provides funding for all 3 branches of state government. So you're going to be hearing from all 3 branches of state government, especially the administration, because that's where most of the spending occurs. Anyway, so we can now move to the next one. Now, as Emily noted, this is a must-pass bill. And, this is where all the spending authority occurs. And without the budget, as Emily noted, nothing happens in state government. But I wanted to point out that because it's a must-pass bill, towards the end, when we get to conference committee, sometimes things get added to this bill. It's like the train leaving the station. So we've had a variety of different things added to the bill, but like Pay Act sometimes gets added to the bill. That's a sort of a common one. And then, we'll see what happens this year. Who knows? But, we try to keep it sane, but
It's really the last bill that passes.
absolutely. Yeah,
Because anything that needs to get through ends up in there, so.
that's right. And so sometimes that last night of the session, after the bill goes through the Senate, then you all are waiting for it to come to the House, and it's the last bill, and then you can go home. And the staff's like, we did it. One more year.
Last day for accountants.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We can just move to the next slide. Okay, so this shows you, it's the budget, as was noted yesterday. It represents, it's a policy bill. It represents priorities. And I think it was noted yesterday that a prior commissioner, Church Hines, said it includes values. It demonstrates the values of, state government. So anyway, that's an important thing to keep in mind. And anyway, we're going to go to the next one. This is a nice picture of the whole idea that you're looking at the entire bill, everything. You've got to consider all the little trees, but really what you got to look at is the big the big force, the big picture. And so some of the standing committees, they're looking at their individual areas of interest, but they're, not having to consider how it fits into the budget as a whole. So that's a very different perspective. And sometimes you guys have to just do your thing and be tough and say, no, not going to work this, these ideas are not going to fit into our forest. And we have, the next slide is just another depiction of this. It's like the next slide. I should actually have my own. I should actually step up to the plate here and be able to run my own thing. Erin, thanks.
This is hysterical.
Yeah, this is a good one. Emily put this together, and yeah, it just shows you the budget is all the jelly beans. And then, sometimes you try to squish another one in there. So, you will all make that decision and have those conversations.
The one that needs to be in the middle is the one that has what every committee wants us to do.
Oh, yeah.
Just like the size of this.
Yeah.
And the next one is here's what we get in the Appropriations Act, because we all have hearts and eyes and minds that are way bigger than what we have money to do. And so that ends up being our job, is to decide how much can fit into that jelly jar.
That's right.
Jelly belly jar.
Mhm. Okay, so this committee, they think about things that other committees don't have to think about. So this is what you think about all day long. So when somebody comes to you with a suggestion, you've got to think about, how is this going to be funded? Where's the money coming from? And you've got to also, consider the cost. You've got to think about, well, maybe we can cut some things in the existing budget to make room for this. And then are these programs that are being suggested, is it a one-time expense or is it ongoing? Are there going to be staff required? What's involved with this new suggestion? And, how does it fit? So the future impact of any consideration is something that this committee spends, a good deal of time discussing and thinking about. Whereas, some other committees may not have to consider all those details. So the next slide, there we go, thank you. So the other thing is when you have a new proposal, you've got to think about, what problem does this proposal solve? Again, is this one time? And how does this proposal stack up against all the other proposals that are being put on the table? And, that can be, as you know, I don't need to tell you, that can be challenging. But those are the sort of things you've got to think about because, we do have a fixed pie. We have, just a given amount of revenue. And so I want to try to fit it all in. Now we're going to talk about the state. Yep. Excuse me.
Are you gonna, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jim.
Are you gonna talk about one time versus ongoing and how?
So we do.
The differences?
Yeah, we do have a slide on that. Yeah, and that's a really important distinction. That's an important thing.
That'll be good for the budget adjustment as well, Lynn.
Exactly.
Yeah, before we go to that, can I ask about, I remember one time a former chair of this committee got on the floor and reminded everybody that all the new proposals and all the things that different committees wanted, that we may balance the budget with these things this year, but next year, because of the way budgets work, is it will go up. And then the year after that, it will go up again. So I think the issue of what is going to happen down the road,
Yeah.
What impact does that have in the future? is
That's right.
Really important.
Yeah,
It's important.
that's right.
And I never thought of it that way, but she explained it really well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. The entire budget, regardless of what you do, even if you do nothing, the whole thing grows. It's like a big animal just growing. Maybe that's a bad analogy because animals become more growing. But okay, you're right. You have to think about this future impact. Okay, so the state budget is a plan. The budget's a plan for the coming fiscal year. And, this plan authorized the expenditure. And it authorized expenditure from specific funding sources. And the budget is also not set in stone. So that's why we have the budget adjustment. And this the budget estimate you're going to hear about this afternoon. We're at the midway point in the fiscal year. And so, the administration has had a chance to take a look around and see what changes need to occur. And so they'll be presented to you this afternoon. And then again, when you work on next year's budget, the fiscal 26 budget, there'll be another opportunity in what we call the C section. We'll talk to you later about that, to make additional changes to the current fiscal year. And here is the idea. I've been doing this for a really, really long time, and I'm not going to talk about how many years, but it's always been, I always think of it as a puzzle, so you've got all these different competing needs, and you've got issues out there that you are going to have to address every year. It's different. Although the last few years we've had some of the same recurring issues, but it's a puzzle. And that's what this slide is trying to emphasize, that we just have to piece it all together and make it all fit. So now, most of you know this, but just to repeat. So the fiscal year is July 1 through June 30th. We're midway through the year right now. And that's what the budget adjustment bill will address. Fiscal 25, that's the year we're in. Yep. I'm sorry. Okay. And then next year, the next bill that you work on is fiscal 26. And so, if you're working on this committee, like you can be working on fiscal 26 bill. And so sometimes, like in my own world, I get the calendar years all mixed up. I'm like, oh no, we've been working on, 25. So like last year, I'm thinking it's calendar 25, but no, this is the calendar for the budget and the subsequent budget. So the next slide talks about how the budget's actually organized. And we're going to have a bigger conversation about this, but we have had the budget organized by function of government. So there's all these appropriations and, just a lot of different activities. And so we have them organized by what we call function of government. And these are the functions that we have typically used, always used, not typically. This is what we use. So when you have a bigger conversation about how the budget's organized and who's got responsibility for each section, so we'll be referring to the function of government. And that's how, when we march through the budget document itself, that's how it's organized. And hopefully you'll become familiar with this, and it'll just be second nature to refer to the functions of government. But for some people, people that are not on this committee, that can be somewhat confusing. All right, now we're going to go. So the whole budget, the whole conversation about the budget is just a conversation about trade-offs. And as we've already mentioned, if you do one thing, maybe you can't do another, but I'm not going to try to turn my page because it just stops me. Okay, no, here we go. I got it. Okay. So, this, I really like this slide a lot because, sometimes we forget like all the different things out there that, this committee needs to think about, as well as the standing committees think about all these as well. So we have, some unfunded liabilities. We've got the pensions and OPEB for both teachers and state employees. And then, we had all these flood recovery issues that are incredibly important. And then, as we all know, with housing initiatives and the unsheltered population. And then not to forget the opioid epidemic that we've been struggling with for, many years now. And then we have things like, the caseload pressures in human services. And you'll learn more about that when we get to the next, in the adjustment bill, you'll learn about some of them, I'm sure, but also as we hear testimony in the FY26 bill. And of course, the biggest one that we've been hearing about is, I shouldn't say the biggest, one of the biggest is the education finance issue. And then there's the cost of the state workforce, how, that has to be fit into the budget, IT projects, the federal match requirements for a variety of different programs. We've got inflationary pressures, climate change, and then, what the governor spoke about yesterday about the demographic and workforce challenges. And to put a plug in for the Joint Fiscal Office website, which is outstanding. There's a really nice issue brief that Joyce Manchester put together on demographics that's on the website. If you ever have a chance, take a look at it because it does, talks about these issues and she does a wonderful job.
That reminds me, Maria, maybe somebody's going to do it, or Emily, or I don't know who, sort of a little tour of the Joint Fiscal Office website and how that's coming up sometime. Okay.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Just as an example, the federal match requirements is or the AFO website.
So
What those things would,
So you'll hear about that in the context of the budget and also the transportation bill. That's a one that you'll hear more about. Let me think about how we can
That's okay.
provide some information that'll help you.
Because it's really across the agencies.
Right.
It is.
Human Services has opportunity to bid for tons of things, housing,
sure.
on and on. So it's across, so that's good.
Thank you. Thank you.
So then, so we'll get you, we'll try to help you with that. That's a constant ongoing concern, we don't generally want to leave federal dollars on the table, so we try to find match money. So this other slide is sort of more areas of uncertainty, and I don't need to go through each of them, but there are things that you're going to hear about. Healthcare costs, actually, that's one that we're hearing a lot about. That's a big one.
Yes.
Maybe we should put that on the other.
Yeah.
It's a really big one, and it affects everything. Yeah. So then there's some things that are just like typical budget pressures, not the pressing needs of the day, but just the typical things that we see year in and year out. And so the Pay Act is up there because you'll hear about it when you're going through the budget. And each year there's a Pay Act that is for the subsequent fiscal year. So in the 26 budget, you'll see Pay Act appropriations for the 26 budget year. But there's this other thing that's lurking, and that's the annualization of the Pay Act from the current fiscal year. So whatever the Pay Act increases were that were given to state employees that were not built into their budget, they were in this separate appropriation. They now have to be built into the budgets. And so you'll hear some departments I don't know what they're going to say this year, but they may say, well, we had a lot of pressure because we had to fit like 5% Pay Act increase into a budget that the governor is wanting us to limit to 3%. And so you've got to squish everything into the budget. So you'll hear about the pressures from Pay Act. And so there's just a distinction between next year's Pay Act and the current year Pay Act that we need to fit into. Okay. And then, of course, we have all the benefits, including the pensions and OPEB, healthcare, of course, is part of that. And then normal inflationary increases. And then we've mentioned caseload pressures before, and then there's always some other needs that come up. All right. So this number, 8.7 billion, that's really great number. It's a huge number. And that's how much our whole budget is, all funding sources. It's in this big pile of money, 8.7 billion.
That includes education, spending, none.
Yes, yeah, it's everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Education and transportation, not just.
Yeah, it's everything.
Just so people understand. And in fact, I think we actually spent less last year than we did the year before. That was on one of the highlight sheets from last year.
Oh, yeah, that could be because we had a lot of one-time funds.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. But the total dollars was actually less than the previous year. Not by a lot, but it was less.
Does that include duplicated funds?
So this is non-duplicated funds. So you're going to hear that term, duplicated funds, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but some things like in Medicaid, that's a perfect example. We have this global commitment fund, and we'll talk about that. But sometimes those funds are duplicated. So you'll have the federal funds, and you'll have this whatever the state match is. It can be a variety of different sources, but then you'll also in other parts of the budget, you'll see those same dollars appropriated. So that's what we call duplicated. So then we try to create this unduplicated number, which is actually
you're right. That's the number that we need to look at. Now, okay, next slide. We're going to just talk quickly about how these dollars were all spent. And this, you've seen this before. This is one of our charts that we use every year. But this shows you sort of like where the big areas of expenditures are. And you can see here, so normally in the Agency of Human Services, we include Medicaid and corrections, but for this purpose, we separated them because they're really big expenditures. So you'll see like we start out with general government, small, this municipal property tax adjustment, then we have protection, which is fairly small. Then, human services is everything except for Medicaid and corrections. So you'll see Medicaid is quite large, and the blue is the federal funds and the gray are the state match. And then if you see corrections down here, the $192.9 million, that's all, it's all state funds, which is an interesting, corrections is different than some of the other departments because it's all general funds. And then we've got labor, which is fairly small, but that's federal dollars mostly. And then you get to the K through 12 education. And this includes, the money that's going out to the towns for the schools. It includes the Agency of Education. It includes the pensions for state teachers. That's like the amount that is, if you go to the budget, the total functions in each part of the budget, that education function will match this number. But
I think Dave had a question. Dave, did you?
Oh, yes.
Yes, thank you. Would this be an appropriate place to talk about maintenance of effort? Is that on your slide?
Well, it's not, but you know what? There's a lot of issues like that it's up to the chair.
Wherever you see fit to do it. Do you want to finish this slide and then if you want to loop back?
Sure. Okay, yes. So you can see we've got the higher ed and all the other functions of government. Transportation has a lot of federal dollars in it. And debt service is an interesting one because we now treat the actual payment of debt service. We transfer that money. So it's in the transfer section of the budget. We'll get to that at another point. And then we have these other miscellaneous one-time things. But Representative Iacoboni makes a very good point that there's some programs, and I'm going to pick Reach Up, even though that's not one of our biggest programs, but the federal government requires that we don't spend less state money than, a given point in time. And in that particular case, it's a long time ago, but there's these requirements that each state maintains their level of effort towards a variety of different programs.
Or else what happens if we don't?
Well, then the gods at the federal level do like very bad things to state. I don't really know all this.
We lose.
Yeah, I'm sure we lose federal funding, but special ed. Oh, yes, special ed. That's a great example too. So you're going to hear this maintenance effort thing come up over and over again. And that's a number that we really can't change. We have to maintain those MOEs. Did I get to what?
Well, yes. And what I found, depending what our sections of the budget are, but when I meet with the various business managers, I always ask them, do we have maintenance of effort? How big is it? Is it a non-issue? Move on. But if it's real, because if someone outside of the committee or even a committee wanted to reduce something, I think it's important to let them know about that concept. Now, it comes at a cost. You're going to lose money.
Absolutely.
That was my intent. Thank you.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
And we'll do all this again when we actually have the budget. This is just this is just overview. Lynn?
Yeah, this is just a quick question. I don't want to get into the weeds here, but on the K-12, you've got the 2.93 billion.
Yes.
The budget for the schools was 2.3. That did not include the pensions, OPEB. Is that fair to think that maybe 631 million is the roughly?
Yeah, and it's also all the funds that are used, not education funds, but the state funds, let's say, that are used to support the agency of education. So if you go to the actual budget document, you look at the education. Yeah, you'll see the whole list of everything that's included there. But I love that question. Because we just had this conversation next door, yesterday, and we all that was clarified for us. So that's a great question.
Thank you. Everybody's interested.
Yeah, I know, they are. Okay, so, sorry.
It just still in K-12, we heard a lot about how there's a lot of services that are being funded through the education fund versus a human services fund or something. Are those breakdowns clear in the documents that you may have in a deeper dive?
So in the budget, okay, let's let Emily take this.
So I think I'm Emily Byrne for the Joint Fiscal Office. I think I've heard that in terms of the conversation around human services being provided by. My understanding is that refers to actually public schools or otherwise picking up, providing human services type activities to kids enrolled in the schools. Because that service is provided at the local level, it's not actually in the state budget anywhere, it's in the local budgets. So there is no real way for us to sort of break that down and at the sort of state budget level, because what the schools are spending their money on, to the extent it's a human services type service for the kids in the school, that's the local budget itself. What's captured in the state budget is the education payment to the school district.
So it probably would be helpful. One of my favorite little charts is the education fund outlook. And that breaks down, all the sources and uses of funds at a state level. So universal school meals are in there, and special ed and transportation and a lot of the things that people like to talk about. So that might be a nice thing to review at some point.
Yes, we can have Julia.
Yes.
And we have a new JFO staff member, Ezra, who's helping Julia with edits and stuff. We can have the two of them come in and do it.
Because I think the whole body really needs to start to understand all of this more anyway, so.
We're talking about it, or it's talked about, whether it's in policy or
Right.
in the ether. And
Exactly.
so just even that little clarification for me, that adds to the complication of the conversation, which
Right.
a lot of people don't like it when it's complicated.
And that's the way it goes too.
Well, so how would I have been hearing, say, the figure $54 million that is that schools are spending on mental health services?
That's a good question. 54 million is.
Yeah,
I will follow up.
it might have been 52. I thought it was 54,
Right.
but at any rate, a lot. It's been used a fair amount in conversations recently, so.
Another good reason to have Julia and Ezra come in and talk to us about this.
Yeah.
So, okay.
All right.
Great. Good. Onward.
Okay, so this slide, so the whole budget, as we discussed, is $8.7 billion. And this shows you, it's just the general fund is just 2.3 billion. And so we have the federal funds, 3.1, and then education fund. We've sort of been talking about that 2.3. And then, turn sideways, you can see the transportation fund is 373, and then we have a variety of special funds, other funds that are 624 billion. So this gives you an idea of the scale of the general fund and, the entire budget, how it's divvied up by fund. Now, you may ask yourself, well, how did we spend this $2.3 million or billion dollars? So we're going to go to the very nice slide there, right there. Thank you, Erin. So one-time funds. One-time funds are dollars that are available to spend on one-time expenditures. So these are things that are not going to recur in the future. So we've tried to be very careful over the years. And this committee has been very careful over the years to not spend one-time dollars on ongoing recurring expenditures, because all you're doing is creating for next year, putting together any kind of revenue growth that there might be. You're going to sop it up with this requirement to spend to fund things in year 2 or year 3. So it's really important that we make the distinction between one-time and base funds.
So sometimes, for example, we may have a grant program. And we have used one-time money for that. We wouldn't use it for people's salaries or staff.
Correct.
Because that's ongoing operations.
Yeah, that's a great example.
That's just simple, yeah.
Yeah. You'll hear a lot more about this just because, there will be in the budget adjustment bill, for instance, you're going to be hearing about the one-time versus ongoing. So this next slide is really, okay, that's good. So what your committee did, what the legislature did last year was they appropriated $68.5 million one-time funds that were available. And you'll see this list. So 25 million went to the education fund. And then we had 16.4 to the GA program for housing. And then we had 11 million to the state colleges for bridge funding for tuition assistance. And then we had some transfers to special funds. And then we had, there was about 10 million to other priorities. And then we had this other list. So we don't always know exactly how much money we're going to collect, because you guys are creating this bill before the end of the fiscal year. So there are years we have additional dollars that flow into the state. And there's a formula for how the dollars are supposed to be distributed. But in this particular case, the General Assembly created a contingent list to use any of these excess dollars that flow into the state in this order. And so what this General Assembly did was they added 20 million to the GA program for housing to bolster that amount. And then they added another 10 million for shelter beds. And then we had some FEMA match for the 23 flood. That was this, 12.5. And then we had, there's this pension plus payment of 12 million. And Chris Roop, who's no longer here, but if you ever want to hear about pensions from the staff perspective, you could hear about it from treasurer's perspective too. That's great. But Chris knows a lot. He's really great at, explaining it. And then we had some other priorities and we had some transfers as well. And that's what's listed here. So this is just a reminder of what the General Assembly did the last year with both one-times and with contingent dollars. And all these contingent dollars did get funded.
So the reason we have this list is in case we bring in more money than the consensus revenue forecast said. So let's just say the consensus revenue forecast said, we're going to have $100 million. And so that's our budget. And we say, well, if more than 100 million comes in, we want to spend it, and here's how we want to spend it, and here's the order in which we want to spend it. So if 100 and, we got 100 million, we got 110 million, then we use the 10 million in that order to go down. And so this year we had enough extra over the budget that we could fund all the contingencies. Some years we have nothing. Some years we might have part of the first one. And we have no idea, but we put that together in the event that we have the money to spend.
That's right. Yes. Okay. So the next slide, this slide talks about the base. So this is this $2.263 million, $2.26 billion. And this is what we consider a base appropriations. And these dollars are included in the official revenue forecast that's adopted by the emergency board. And you're going to be hearing about the revenue forecast because we're going to have an upgrade towards do we know, Emily, when that board meeting is for the 22nd of January? So you'll hear more about the revenue forecast. But right now, the base amount of money that we have in the budget for 25 is this figure. So these dollars support ongoing expenditures and operations of state government. And these dollars are, very, important to the budget because in theory, we can rely on them year in and year out. And so that's a case where, state employees might be funded with base dollars. We have programs, the next slide, this one here. Thank you, Erin. This shows where the base dollars are spent. And you'll see this big blue Medicaid chunk. And this is just general fund, by the way, just to be clear on that.
No federal funds are in this.
No federal,
All
this is
general.
all federal funds. So this is where our general fund base money goes in 25. So you can see that Medicaid is a really big expenditure. And you'll hear more about that as we hear testimony on the budget. You'll also, I'm sure you're going to hear more about it this afternoon when you hear from Adam Gresham on the budget adjustment bill. I'm thinking you might.
I expect at some point Nolan will come in and talk about Medicaid.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that'll be good.
yeah. So, so Erin, if we could just go to the next, the e-board revenue forecast upgrade in July. Okay, so, so approximately $172 million in additional forecasted revenue in fiscal 25 was adopted back at the July e-board meeting. And so you're going to see some reference to that likely in the bill for 26 and also likely in the 25 budget adjustment bill. I don't, we don't know yet. We'll find out.
So Maria, in this case, the fiscal, we adopted the budget and then this happened, the e-board met, and then this is sort of like, now we have the first half of the FY 25 budget. We didn't have a contingency in the FY 25 budget for that $172 million.
Correct.
So that's where the budget adjustment really comes in to say, well, now we have, things have happened in the budget that we didn't expect, and now it looks like we have more money, and here's how we're going to propose to use it. So we will hear more about this.
That's correct.
I expect, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. And I mean, sometimes money will be spent, will be moved to the next fiscal year to address, whatever issues need to be addressed. And then as we just noted that there's going to be another forecast on January 22nd. So you'll hear more about the revenues. We'll learn more and that'll inform your decisions on the budget. And then, some of these current year budget challenges, you can decide how to address them. So, it's interesting. This is obviously not the revenue committee, but it's interesting and helpful to understand where the money actually comes from. So in the general fund, this is a list of, the sources of money that goes into the general fund. And personal income taxes, that's the biggest one. And so, this is just as for a reference. And we can show you as we hear about the January 22nd revenue forecast. We will show you a document that Tom Gavette puts together that really goes through in more detail the different revenues that go into the general fund. But this is sort of a thumbnail sketch of what the general fund includes. All right, so can we move on or?
That's good.
Okay, good. And so we have the same thing for the transportation fund. It's, again, I always like to remind myself of what's in there because you definitely hear about different revenue sources as we go through this process. And like, for instance, in transportation fund, 2/3 of the purchase and use tax goes into transportation fund. And then 1/3 of it, you'll see on the next slide, it goes into the education fund. There we go, education fund. So the education fund, has other sources of money aside from the non-homestead and the homestead property tax. It's got, all the sales and use money. It's got 1/4 of the meals and rooms. It's got 1/3 of the purchase and use. It's got lottery proceeds. And then there's some smaller miscellaneous sources. And you'll see that when we get more into education fund, you'll see the operating statement for the education fund and you can identify all the different revenue sources. But again, it's just like a reference point for you to see in general.
Okay, so the non-homestead's number one, 40%. Sales and use, does that include the sales tax?
Yeah, that's it.
That's
Yeah.
it? Okay, it's different from the purchase and use, that's the cars.
That's right.
Okay, the net,
Just to clarify that, we have the word use twice, and I never really
Yeah.
understand which use was what use, and why do we have that
So,
twice?
that's a great question, and I actually have had that same question, and I really, I would love it if we could ask Chris Roop that question, because he might have a good answer for you, but I agree, it's confusing. It is.
Okay, so the next question is, then you had net homestead property tax. Can you explain that better?
Okay,
That's
so,
that's the resident tax. That's
Yes,
people
that's
who
for the-
actually live in a home.
yeah, and again, it's not my area of expertise, but that also, it is after the income sensitivity payment, so it's the net.
And we have another question.
Where does, at the end of last year, we added 70 or $90 million from excess funding to make the education fund balance. Where does that show up? I don't know what the
So,
exact number.
yeah, so that's a great question, and it's going to be on the operating statement for the education fund, and Julia Richter is our education person, and I think she's best to answer that, unless
Yes.
Emily
The-
has.
The two things I would add is it was 25 million at the end of last year that went from the general fund to the education fund. And this is just the sort of, the revenues into it, not transfers into it. So there are, this is where to get into the weeds, there are sources to funds that are not revenues, that are transfers, sort of moving from one fund. So that shows up as a transfer, so. Julia does the operating statement for the education fund,
And
you'll see it coming in.
right, and so thank you for that. And then a quick question, when we finished last year, we talked about this transfer. We talked about starting this year in the hole by that much money. Is there a 45-second explanation of that, or is that a deeper conversation?
Yeah, so that was a one-time, so there was both the $25 million that was transferred from the general fund to the education fund was a one-time transfer, as it was outlined in the bill last year. And then there was other one-time money that was used in the education fund. So when people talk about, I believe it's about $68 million of one-time money that was used in the education fund last year. That was a combination of one-time funds. There was some fund balances and some prior year funds available, plus the general fund transfer to the education fund sort of made up that extra one-time money that was used to balance the education.
So we're starting our work, that amount of money, quote unquote, in the hole that we have to account for, which is what you were talking about when we use one-time money for what's an ongoing expense, which is
Yes.
education.
That's exactly right.
Yes, we went against our principles, but we also had a bigger issue at the state level with property taxes and, and all of that. So that was a very highly unusual situation where we did something that we would not normally.
So our sandbox is going to be empty on one end when we find out how
Well,
much money we're
the
going to have.
education fund is going to be
Okay.
starting that way.
Yep. Thank
And
you.
we'll have to see what happens there.
Yeah, of course, we're going to hear a lot more about that.
Yes.
Okay, so Erin, if we could just go to the next slide. Okay, so then, you'll hear about these other sources of funds, like, so federal funds, we'll talk more about that. There's a lot of federal funds in this budget. And then this global commitment fund, which is for Medicaid and other related investments. You'll also hear more about that. I mean, that's, it's a bigger subject than I can just go into right now, but it's an important one. And then we have a whole variety of special funds. There's 400 special funds, and there is a report that comes out. It's submitted to the Joint Fiscal Committee, and I think it's in September, and it's on our website. It's a point in time report, but it'll show you, it's interesting because it'll just show you what all the funds are,
And we can find it, and if people want to have copies of it, we can get copies made. I personally like to keep a copy because it's interesting to see what the balances are in some, and they show up in the budget over time. Unfortunately, they're not alphabetical. It's 3 pages of, I think, in order of creation or so. I don't know. I don't know actually if anybody knows how it got put together, but it's impossible. I mean, you have to go through all 8 pages and just hope yours is on the first 2.
And just to clarify, the special fund is if a policy says we wanted to charge 2 cents on the rooms and meals taxes, especially for a certain policy, reason. So childcare was been bandied about, but we never passed anything quite like, that's where this would show up, this listing.
Yeah, cannabis has funds, opioid settlement fund.
Yeah.
Lottery is in it.
Lottery, yeah.
And, there's, I mean, the state's, is self-employed, self-insured for like workers' compensation and for other insurance. The premiums for that show up in the individual budget, but it goes into a special fund. And if, you know, for example, on workers' comp, if our claims exceed, you'll see a negative balance in there that sometimes the administration will come and say, we can make a transfer to make it whole. There's a wide variety of them, and a lot of them are used for very good reasons, but I think as a rule, we've been sensitive to just creating, because you kind of lose a little bit of oversight control when you have 100 different funds you're trying to look at.
Sure, or 400 in this case.
Yeah, well,
So are people interested in getting a copy of that special funds report? Okay. That would be great. And we can probably put it on our website too. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so Erin, can we go to the next one? Statutory reserves. So we do have these reserves, and the main takeaway is that, you know, these are dollars that are not available for discretionary use. So at the close of fiscal 24, the reserve amounts that we had in the general fund, we had this 306.6 million. The education fund is 47 million, and transportation is 14.1. They are, for the general fund, it's 5% of the prior year's appropriations, general fund appropriations. And so if you do any more spending in 25, as an example, then in the 26 bill, we might need to add a little bit of money to the reserve, because we got to cover that 5%. And the types of reserves, and we can talk more about this. This is you know, a lot of stuff that we're giving you, but so we have the stabilization reserves. We have another fund called the rainy day reserves, and these are all in statute. Then we have the human service caseload reserve, and then we have this 2753 reserve, which you know, again, we will talk more about this, but I just wanted to put those on some document somewhere so that you could be aware of what they were.
So when you see them again, you say, oh, well, maybe I saw that somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. And you'll hear about them again, and we do put them on our operating statement for the general fund. So you'll definitely see it again. And can we, Erin, go to the next slide? This is the Vermont's budget process, and your chair actually went over this earlier. You did a very good job of going through it. This is generally what, you know, the schedule is for putting together the budget. And it starts with the, in September, with the governor's office going through discussing budgets with each agency and department. And then, you know, they work on it in November and December. And, you know, I guess they don't have Christmas vacations. They don't do anything. They just all come to the office and they just work. And, you know, so there's a lot that goes into this. And right before the budget address, which is coming up, Emily, do you know what that is? I should know.
28 is what I.
Oh, the 28, okay. So that staff over there, you just got to have some real empathy for them, because they're working their tails off right now to get that whole budget put together. But in any case, this is the schedule, and we can refer back to it if you're interested at all. But the final slide is just a reminder, and you've heard this before, to fund base with ongoing revenue and strategic investments with one-time funding. So if you have these one-time things like IT projects, you know, you'll hear about all kinds of different one-time potential expenditures, but just got to keep base and one-time separate. And we've got to really pay attention to not only the current year revenue forecast, but what's going to happen in the future. And we've got to get into Representative Yakavone's point, maximizing federal funds. I mean, you didn't exactly say that, but I know where you're coming from because I've worked with you before. And we've got to understand the status of our investments. And we've got to assess and understand. So when, this committee makes investments, we want to make sure that we ask the commissioner and secretaries in subsequent years, well, how did that go? Like, we don't want to just take all this really valuable money, state dollars, and give it to a program and then forget about that program. We need to, keep track and hopefully understand.
And in fact, thank you for saying that, Maria,
Yes.
because I'm going to be working on revising our letters to the agencies about their budget presentations. And
Yes.
I do not want to start with what we call the ups and downs, the changes in the previous year. You have absolutely no context about what's happened. I want them to start with, how did you spend the money you had? How successful were those programs? Was anybody better off?
Yeah.
Why did we do these things? Do we need to keep doing them? Can we do them differently? So that's the conversation we need to be having so that we are ensuring that we're spending our state dollars in the most effective and appropriate way. So you'll hear more about that later. Yes, Tom.
How does a program that's been started with one-time funding graduate to base funding?
So that's a great question. So you'll hear, well, sometimes the governor might include like year 2 funding in the budget, sometimes. Sometimes, if it's a grant program that gone out to nonprofits, you'll hear some advocates will come in and they'll ask you for funding for the next year. So, generally that's how you hear about it. It doesn't, one-time funding is just that. It is absolutely for 1 year. As noted, though, sometimes we'll see it in the subsequent year in the governor's bill, but mostly we'll hear from advocates if it's a grant program and,
But at some point, some programs get baked in to.
Oh, yeah, they get baked in, but okay. So let me just go, take a step back. So in the budget, when we go through the actual bill, the way it's put together, there's the sections of the bill, the B sections are all our base sections. So if you wanted to have a one-time appropriation from 25 and put it in the 26 bill as a base, like if let's say the governor did that, he would put it in these B sections. But at the bottom of the B sections, this is where it gets confusing. We have all these B numbers like B 1100 that are all one times, but it's a different numbering. It's a list of one times and it says on like one-time appropriations. That's where all the one-time appropriations are. But all those other ones above it in the individual department budgets, that's a base appropriation. So, you'll hear people will say, well, we want to move, money for whatever the program is into the base. And so what they're really asking you to do is go to that underlying department or agency budget and add it to their base budget. Otherwise, it'll be on that long list of one-time appropriations that are.
So the governor can do it. We can have something going for a while. The governor could choose to do it. We could choose to do it and put it in base. There are always consequences, and that's the part we have to think about because the whole notion of future costs. And we wrestle with that every year.
Yeah. So now I'm out of slides. We're gonna have,
On the web.
yeah, it's gonna be.
It's on our committee page now.
Yes.
It'll always be on our committee page. And I don't know if Mike, you have any questions there on Zoom? You're good?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, great. Does anybody else have any questions for Maria? Dave?
Tax expenditures.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So that's a great question. So, Representative Iacovone is asking a really good question. We have this concept of, tax expenditure budget. And so when there are issues or items that do not get, that there's no tax paid on them, that there's a value to the tax that's lost, that the state does not collect. And when you add all these things together, that's the tax expenditure budget. And the governor will give you on the 28th, when he, proposes the budget, he'll give you this little small book that's bound, it's like a spiral notebook kind of thing. And I believe at the very end of it is the tax expenditure budget. So it has all the things, that are exempt from taxes at the state level that, actually cost us money. So
It's big,
yeah, it's big. Yeah.
300 million?
So yeah, you're asking me to do this from memory, which,
Yeah.
I can, I'll get it for you. It's a lot.
We'll get more information about
Yeah,
that.
but it's a really important thing to keep in mind. Yes.
And if I may, someone, wise, thoughtful person might say, boy, I'd like to exempt social security taxes for some cohort of Vermonters. It's a tax expenditure because the dollars will no longer be available in the budget to spend on other causes. It's an exemption, so to speak.
Foregone revenue.
Comes
That's
at a
right.
cost.
That's exactly.
And there's many, many of those that are policy decisions usually made by Ways and Means and absorbed kind of in the budget. We don't have somebody come in and we don't go, at least historically, we haven't drilled down on those and said, gee, that's a source where we could
Right,
get some
and that's what
revenue.
Ways and Means has done. I mean, when I was on there, we did look at it occasionally because we would have people saying, let's stop exempting sugary beverages, for example, or candy bars and, and then they get into the streamlined sales tax and how we work with other states, and we're not going to go there today, but it's just to be aware of. Representative here.
It exists.
No, I just, clarification, I mean, a lot of that's also put in your fiscal, book.
Oh, the fiscal fact book?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a great thing. Yeah, we have on our website, and when we go through the webpage for the fiscal office, we can point out the
Yeah,
fiscal
so we
fact.
don't tax clothing, for example.
Exactly,
There's
yes.
Value.
There's a
We've
value,
assumed everything was taxed.
foregone tax.
Value to that, just like there is for groceries. We don't tax
Exactly.
groceries, regular food.
That's right.
Great. Any other questions? Emily?
I was gonna say, there's also a report JFO does every other year, the tax expenditure report, which year. I don't remember when it's due, but it's soon, and
Okay.
we've been working on it all fall.
And it's
Yeah.
quite a big report because I found my 3-ring binder that had it in it from 2023.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, maybe I won't bring that to the State House
It'll be a
this
new
time.
one.
Good, so I'll just leave it home. Okay. Any other questions for Maria or Emily or JFO staff? Thank you very
Oh,
much.
you're welcome.
This is great, and you will see a lot of Maria because she is glued to this desk. So our committee, we are going to be breaking for lunch, and we'll be back here. Adam Gresham is going to start at 1:30 we'll get our Budget Adjustment Act, we're getting our first bill this afternoon. I'll remind you at the end of the day, but we're going to go through at least the spreadsheet. He's going to bring everything. We're going to go through all the spreadsheet information that he thinks will take at least a couple of hours, and I'm sure we'll have lots of questions because it's a learning experience for all of us. I have not seen it. I don't have any advanced knowledge of what's going on. And he'll bring the language. He may say a couple of highlights, but he won't get through all the language today. We decided that we're not going to meet this Monday. This is kind of unusual, but it's really difficult for Aaron to find people to come to committee when it's 4:00 on Friday afternoon, and can they come Monday and be prepared to talk about the budget adjustment? So you'll have a chance to bring this all home with you and take a look at it, take a look at the language, get ready, start to try to absorb it. Adam will come back on Tuesday morning. I'll go over at the end of the day what the agenda is going to look like for next week, but he'll come back and go over the language in depth then. So
We'll probably go to 4.
today, yes, I would think so.
Probably.
Yeah. I can't believe that this committee will be completely quiet and have no questions on the budget adjustment. So I think that's it. And we'll